Imagine for a moment that you've been running from connection, from confrontation, from the very feelings that remind you you're alive. You've been telling yourself, if I avoid this, it'll go away. If I sidestep it, I'll stay safe. And you have, or at least you think you have. But life has a way of showing up unannounced. It doesn't knock politely. And here's the truth, there is one reaction, one moment that you never prepare for, and it will change everything. It's the moment when someone you care about, someone who sees you, not the mask, not the defenses, not the walls you've built, responds with clarity, with courage, with authentic presence. It doesn't yell. It doesn't plead. It doesn't demand that you feel ashamed. It simply exists as truth. And that truth, it's undeniable. It's powerful. It stirs something deep inside you, something you've been trying to ignore. When you face that reaction, when someone meets your avoidance with unwavering authenticity, here's what happens. You see yourself as you truly are, not who you pretend to be. And in that mirror, you recognize a choice. Continue hiding or rise. You see, avoidance isn't safety. It's a shadow. It delays your destiny. Every time you sidestep your feelings, every time you retreat from confrontation, you pay a price. The unexpected reaction, however, is a gift. A wake-up call. A divine signal saying, step into your power. Take responsibility. Engage with life fully. Growth is not waiting for life to be easy. Transformation doesn't come from retreating. It comes when you stand, when you respond with courage, when you embrace the moment you've been avoiding. That moment is no longer a threat. It's an opportunity. So today, I want you to feel this truth in your bones. The walls you've built cannot contain your potential. The avoidance that feels safe cannot protect your greatness. When life shows up with clarity, authenticity, and unflinching truth, it is not your enemy. It is your awakening. And the most powerful thing, once you meet that reaction, once you feel it, once you face it, you will never be the same again. You will step into a life that is bigger, richer, fuller, and more alive than you ever imagined. Because courage, accountability, and presence are not just words. They are your birthright. And the one reaction you never prepared for, it's waiting to give you exactly that. Rise to it. Own it. Transform. Avoidance feels safe, doesn't it? When life asks too much of us, when emotions swell beyond what we feel we can manage, avoidance steps in like a loyal guard. We sidestep the conversation that feels uncomfortable. We push aside the feeling that makes us vulnerable. We tell ourselves that if we don't face it today, it will somehow disappear tomorrow. And for a moment, that shield works. For a moment, we feel relief, as if the weight has lifted. But here's the truth that most people don't want to see. Avoidance is never permanent. It is a temporary illusion of safety, and the longer you rely on it, the greater the cost you pay. Avoidance tricks us into believing we are in control, that we are protecting ourselves from pain. But in reality, every time we retreat, every time we sidestep responsibility, we are building a debt of consequences that life will inevitably collect. The conversation you refuse to have, the truth you refuse to confront, the boundary you refuse to set, they do not vanish, they linger, quietly eroding your peace, clouding your clarity, and limiting your growth. You may walk away thinking you've shielded yourself, but in doing so, you are also shielding yourself from connection, from understanding, and from the transformative power of facing what scares you most. When you avoid, you are not escaping life, you are postponing it. And the irony is that avoidance does not make the problem smaller. It only gives it time to grow. The feelings you bury, the truths you ignore, the responsibilities you defer, they fester beneath the surface. They shape your actions without your awareness, influencing your choices, your relationships, and your sense of self. You may tell yourself, I'm safe, but the reality is avoidance is a prison disguised as freedom. It is a temporary shield that leaves you exposed to the most powerful force in life, reality. The deeper truth is that avoidance teaches nothing. It does not build courage, resilience, or wisdom. It does not cultivate intimacy or trust. All it does is delay your confrontation with reality and with yourself. And every moment spent hiding, every second spent retreating, reinforces the habit of fear. Fear becomes comfortable. Withdrawal becomes normal. And before long, you may find that the very moments that could have transformed your life, the hard conversations, the vulnerable expressions, the stepping forward into discomfort, have passed you by. Yet avoidance is not inherently bad. It is a signal. It is a signpost pointing to what matters most, to what you are afraid to face but need to face in order to grow. It is a temporary shield meant to give you pause, not a permanent solution. The path forward is not to eliminate avoidance entirely, because fear will always arise, but to recognize it, understand it, and use it as a cue to step into courage. The moment you stop seeing avoidance as protection and start seeing it as a signal for action, you shift from a life of retreat to a life of engagement, from fear to empowerment, and from survival to purpose. Life has a way of showing up in moments we least expect, and for someone who is avoidant, these moments can feel like earthquakes. Avoidants train themselves to anticipate conflict, to sidestep discomfort, and to create distance between themselves and the intensity of emotion. They build their walls carefully, layer by layer, believing that avoidance is the safest way to survive. Yet no matter how high the walls, no matter how strategic the retreat, life has a way of testing the very foundations of that security. And it comes in the form of unexpected emotional confrontation, a moment that is sudden, unplanned, and unavoidable, but also profoundly transformative. This confrontation is not a lecture, a punishment, or an attack. It is something far deeper. It is authenticity meeting avoidance face to face. It is a response from someone who sees you clearly, who refuses to allow the illusion of safety to shield you from truth. It may come as a heartfelt question, a simple statement of expectation, or a calm declaration of boundary. But the effect is the same. It pierces the veil of avoidance, forcing a choice. In that moment, you can no longer hide. You can no longer delay. You are confronted with a reality that cannot be sidestepped. The way you have been living, avoiding, and retreating must meet the light of honest engagement. The power of this confrontation lies in its unexpectedness. Avoidants by nature attempt to predict and control emotional outcomes. They prepare for arguments, for criticism, for scenarios where they can maintain control. But life's truth is that emotional confrontation rarely arrives in a neat, predictable package. It does not announce itself with a warning label. It arrives in real time, fully formed, and often when least anticipated. This is what makes it transformative. It is unplanned, and it forces presence. When avoidance meets something it cannot calculate or evade, it must reckon with reality. And in that growth is born. Transformation occurs because the unexpected reaction serves as a mirror. It reflects back what avoidance obscures, the impact of your actions, the consequences of retreat, and the unacknowledged longing for connection that avoidance cannot satisfy. It is not comfortable. It may provoke fear, shame, or resistance. And yet, these very emotions are the soil of transformation. They are the signals that something inside you is ready to change, that a higher level of awareness is calling you forward. Avoidance may resist, but the confrontation invites courage. It demands reflection. It offers clarity. In that moment, you are presented with a choice to retreat further into avoidance or to step forward into authenticity. Most avoidants have never prepared for this sudden, unwavering presence of honesty because it cannot be predicted or rehearsed. But when it lands, when the moment arrives, it carries the potential to shatter old patterns, illuminate hidden truths, and awaken the courage that has always existed beneath the fear. It is not merely confrontation, it is a gift disguised as challenge, a catalyst for transformation that avoidance can never anticipate, but desperately needs. Emotional clarity is one of the most overlooked forces in human growth, yet it has the power to reshape entire lives. For an avoidant, clarity is like sunlight breaking through a dense fog. When we live in avoidance, our emotions are clouded, distorted, and fragmented. We tell ourselves stories to protect our fragile sense of control. If I ignore this, it will go away, or if I stay quiet, I'm safe. But these stories are illusions. They shield us temporarily, but they cannot erase the truth. Emotional clarity, on the other hand, cuts through the illusion with precision and honesty. It does not compromise. It does not negotiate. It demands that we see ourselves and our situations as they truly are. Avoidants often believe that avoiding emotions keeps them safe from pain. They mistake detachment for wisdom and distance for security, but in reality, avoidance only delays the inevitable encounter with truth. Emotional clarity arrives when someone responds with authenticity, when life forces reflection, or when we finally decide to confront ourselves. In that instant, everything that has been hidden, postponed, or ignored comes into focus. The fear, the longing, the regrets, the unmet needs, all of it becomes undeniable. And while this can feel uncomfortable, even frightening, it is also liberating. Because clarity is not a threat. it is a doorway. The power of emotional clarity lies in its ability to illuminate cause and effect in our lives. It shows how avoidance has shaped our relationships, our decisions, and our sense of self. It exposes patterns that have gone unnoticed, habits that have undermined our growth, and truths we've been unwilling to acknowledge. For an avoidant, this can feel like being unmasked, as if someone has stripped away the layers of protection they have relied on for so long. And yet, this exposure is not meant to punish, it is meant to empower. Once we see clearly, we gain the ability to respond consciously rather than react unconsciously. Once we understand our emotions, we can guide them rather than be guided by them. Emotional clarity also creates the possibility for authentic connection. Avoidants often struggle with intimacy, not because they don't desire it, but because they fear the vulnerability it demands. When clarity emerges, it reveals both the barriers and the possibilities. It shows where boundaries need to be strengthened, where forgiveness is required, and where courage must be exercised. It highlights what has been lost to avoidance and what can now be reclaimed through conscious presence. In other words, clarity does not just expose, it opens the path for real, meaningful engagement with ourselves and with others. Finally, the power of emotional clarity lies in its permanence. While avoidance is fleeting, temporary, and ultimately ineffective, clarity is enduring. It does not fade with time or circumstance. Once you see the truth of your emotions and face them, you cannot unsee them. That vision becomes the compass for your decisions, the anchor for your growth, and the catalyst for transformation. It gives you the courage to act, the wisdom to choose, and the strength to face life fully. In the end, emotional clarity is the force that converts fear into empowerment, avoidance into presence, and confusion into purpose. It is the bridge from retreat to courage, from illusion to reality, and from surviving to truly living. For an avoidant, encountering this clarity may be shocking, unexpected, and even uncomfortable, but it is the single most powerful force that can transform avoidance into conscious, courageous engagement with life. Avoidance may feel like a shield, a safe place where we can retreat from confrontation, discomfort, or responsibility. It lulls us into believing that by sidestepping difficult conversations or suppressing feelings, we are protecting ourselves. Yet, in reality, avoidance is not neutral. It is active, and it has a cost. Every time we choose not to act, every time we delay facing our emotions, we set into motion consequences that are inevitable, relentless, and often far greater than we anticipated. Avoidance may give the illusion of safety, but consequences do not wait. They accumulate quietly, invisibly, until they arrive like a wave that cannot be stopped, demanding acknowledgement and action. The consequences of avoidance are subtle at first. They creep into relationships, seeping into trust and intimacy. When we avoid expressing our true feelings, people may sense our distance or our hesitation. They may feel confused, hurt, or unvalued. Even if we think no one notices, avoidance has a ripple effect. It shapes perception, erodes connection, and builds emotional debt. The more we retreat, the more we disconnect, not just from others, but from ourselves. Our self-awareness diminishes, our clarity fades, and the very patterns we are trying to escape tighten around us like chains. Avoidance, in this sense, is a decision that carries invisible consequences, slowly altering the landscape of our lives. But avoidance is not limited to relationships. It affects opportunities, growth, and potential. By sidestepping challenges, we deny ourselves the chance to develop courage, resilience, and emotional mastery. Every time we choose the path of least resistance, we reinforce the habit of retreat. Over time, avoidance becomes not just a behavior but an identity. Someone who runs from discomfort, someone who waits for life to force them into action. And when the unavoidable moment comes, which it always does, the impact is magnified. The cost is higher because the confrontation we postpone is no longer optional. It is necessary, urgent, and unavoidable. The lesson here is profound. Avoidance triggers its own consequences, whether we are prepared or not. It is a feedback loop that forces accountability, often in ways we cannot predict. A difficult conversation delayed becomes a crisis when unspoken tensions erupt. An unexpressed boundary becomes resentment when crossed. An ignored responsibility becomes loss when the opportunity disappears. Avoidance does not erase reality, it intensifies it. Life has a way of converting avoidance into lessons, sometimes gentle, sometimes harsh, but always unavoidable. Yet, within T, his truth lies immense potential. Recognizing that avoidance carries consequences empowers us to act differently. It teaches us that courage is not a luxury, it is a necessity. It reminds us that facing discomfort head-on, expressing emotions clearly, and taking responsibility proactively allows us to steer our lives rather than be swept along by the tide of postponed reactions. Each act of engagement, no matter how small, interrupts the cycle of avoidance and rewrites its consequences into opportunities for growth, connection, and transformation. Avoidance may promise temporary relief, but the truth is inescapable. Consequences follow every step of retreat. They are not punishment. They are reality calling us to step fully into life, to act consciously, and to take responsibility for our presence in the world. The power lies in choosing to face those consequences with awareness, courage, and intentionality, transforming what once threatened us into a catalyst for strength, wisdom, and authenticity. Awareness is the first spark of transformation. It is the moment when we step back from autopilot, from habit, from avoidance, and truly see what is happening inside and around us. For an avoidant, this moment is rare, often uncomfortable, because it demands attention to what has long been ignored, the feelings, patterns, and behaviors that have been buried beneath layers of defense. Avoidance creates distance, but awareness closes it. It shines a light on the hidden corners of our emotional landscape, revealing not just what we fear, but also what we are capable of. And in this awareness lies the seed of mastery. Mastery does not begin with perfection. It does not start with control over every reaction or a flawless execution of self-discipline. Mastery begins with seeing clearly, seeing ourselves without excuses, without denial, without rationalization. Awareness allows us to recognize the ways avoidance has shaped our choices, the subtle compromises we have made to feel safe, and the patterns that have limited our potential. For avoidance, this recognition can feel threatening at first, because it challenges the very strategies that have been relied on for survival. But it is only by confronting this reality that true growth becomes possible. Awareness is the doorway through which mastery enters. When we become aware, we gain clarity. We can distinguish between fear that is protective and fear that is limiting. We can identify the triggers that push us into avoidance and the recurring situations where retreat has cost us connection, opportunity, or authenticity. Awareness teaches us to pause before reacting, to observe before withdrawing, and to choose consciously instead of responding automatically. It transforms confusion into insight and impulsive retreat into intentional action. Every moment of self-observation strengthens our ability to respond rather than react, to act with purpose rather than with reflexive fear. Awareness also empowers accountability. Avoidance thrives in the shadows, but mastery requires honesty with ourselves and with those we affect. By becoming aware of our patterns, we can take responsibility for the ways we have avoided, the opportunities we have missed, and the connections we have weakened. This is not about guilt or shame. It is about clarity and ownership. When we understand our tendencies, we no longer blame circumstances or others for the gaps in our lives. Instead, we claim them, and with that claim comes the power to transform them. The journey from awareness to mastery is gradual, but deliberate. Awareness without action is like seeing a map without taking a step. It informs, but it does not move. Mastery emerges when awareness is combined with intention, practice, and courage. Each time an avoidant acknowledges a fear, steps into a difficult conversation, or expresses a suppressed feeling, mastery grows. Every choice to act consciously, even in the face of discomfort, rewires the patterns of avoidance and strengthens the capacity to engage fully with life. Ultimately, awareness is the foundation on which all growth rests. Without it, avoidance continues unchecked, subtle consequences accumulate, and the potential for connection and purpose remains dormant. With it, we see clearly, act intentionally, and transform limitation into strength. Mastery is not about eliminating fear or avoiding failure. It is about recognizing the truth of our behaviors and learning to navigate if with presence, courage, and conscious choice. Awareness precedes mastery because you cannot control what you cannot see, but once you see, you are free to transform, free to engage, and free to thrive. Empowerment is not something that happens while you hide. It does not grow in the shadows of avoidance or behind the walls we build to feel safe. True empowerment comes from engagement, from stepping into life fully, even when fear is present, even when the outcome is uncertain. For an avoidant, this is a difficult truth because retreat feels easier, safer, and more comfortable. Avoidance creates the illusion of control, but control without action is an illusion. The moment you step forward, the moment you choose response over retreat, you awaken a power that has been dormant all along. The power to shape your life, influence your world, and define your destiny. Action is transformative because it disrupts avoidance at its root. When you avoid, you are reacting to fear. You are giving the circumstance, the other person, or the emotion the power to dictate your behavior. But when you act, you reclaim your authority. You take responsibility for your presence, your choices, and your impact. Empowerment is not granted by circumstance. It is claimed through deliberate, courageous action. Each small step you take against the tide of avoidance is a declaration. I will not be defined by fear. I will not hide from life. I will engage. And with each step, confidence grows, resilience strengthens, and the habit of retreat loses its grip. Empowerment also comes from embracing discomfort as a teacher. Avoidance is a temporary relief, a pause from tension, but discomfort is a catalyst. Every challenging conversation, every vulnerable expression, every moment of accountability carries within it the potential for growth. When you act in spite of discomfort, you are not just surviving, you are learning, evolving, and transforming. Action converts fear into energy, hesitation into momentum, and potential into reality. Avoidance delays this transformation. Action accelerates it. By moving toward what you fear rather than away from it, you claim mastery over your emotions, your decisions, and ultimately, your life. Furthermore, empowerment grows when action is consistent. One bold step is a spark, but repeated intentional steps create a fire. Each time you face an avoided situation, each time you speak a truth you have been hiding, and each time you stand firm despite uncertainty, you strengthen the neural pathways of courage and resilience. Avoidance may have created patterns of retreat, but action rewires them. Over time, what once felt impossible, the confrontation, the vulnerability, the honest expression, becomes second nature. Empowerment is built on repetition, on persistence, and on the willingness to show up, even when it is uncomfortable. Finally, action connects you to your own power because it aligns you well with life, rather than against it. Retreat isolates, disempowers, and diminishes potential. Action, by contrast, engages, energizes, and amplifies your presence in the world. When you choose to act rather than hide, you influence outcomes, create opportunities, and invite connection. You are no longer a passive observer of life. You become a participant, a creator, a force. Avoidance may have been your instinct, but action is your choice, and in that choice lies freedom, strength, and the true essence of empowerment. Every avoidant must understand this. Hiding never transforms, avoiding never liberates, and retreat never empowers. The one path to genuine power is through deliberate, courageous action. Each step forward is a reclaiming of agency, a declaration of purpose, and a bridge to the life you were meant to live. True empowerment is not waiting for fear to disappear. It is standing in its presence and moving anyway. Thank you for your time and trust. Wishing you strength and clarity on every step of your journey. Goodbye for now, and may every challenge you face transform into your greatest opportunity.